everyone. How's it going? My name is Nadine Salmont. I am a certified money coach and a somatic practitioner. Welcome to the Unfuck Your Money Show. I've got a special guest with me today. We've been best friends for the past 3 days. Oh man. Welcome, Felina, to the Unfuck Your Money Show. So good to have you. We've got a lot to talk about, like a lot to talk about. I feel like it's going to be one of those interviews that might have a part 2. So correct me if I'm not pronouncing your last beautiful Greek last name properly. Felina Danalis. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it great. That's how it is in English. Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good. Nailed it. Tell us about yourself.
Nailed it.
That boring question, every time I go to a podcast course or whatever, like, do not start the interview with tell us about yourself. Tell us about yourself. Let's rebel.
Wow. Okay, tell us about yourself. Wow, that's a horrible question. So I'll tell you about what I like. How about that? Let's start with
the original question is what turns you on in life? That's my first question.
Yeah, okay.
You like that?
That I can work with.
Good.
Yeah, I can work with that. I really love Greek food. And I'm not the only one, apparently. I love to cook. I love to feed people. I love to feel that connection with my lineage. I would love to just have this mix of little things. One of my favorite things in Greeks, and like you have in many parts of that part of the world, is meze.
Yep.
We have little bits,
tapas
like
thing.
little.
Yeah,
Exactly. There's a little plate of this and a little plate of that and a little bit of the other thing, and that is just so nourishing to me. That is so how I believe. Like that feels really, really good in my life. Like, it feels really good. Like, it makes me very happy when I sit down at a table that's like with a bunch of meze on it. I feel abundant. I feel connected, and there's variety, right? Because variety is the spice of life. So variety is important, and the colors, and they're evocative. There's like, oh, and then there's conversation starters,
and different
like
textures.
eggplant salad. There's different textures. So like I'm going to a gathering this evening, and one of my friends is Croatian, and she's making the tzatziki, and I'm like, are we gonna have to have a whole conversation about her tzatziki versus my tzatziki? Because I'm
funny.
all about right, and I love that, right? And it's so interesting. Of like, it just makes me very, very happy to be in that conversation with people, because it's so the opposite of. It's so the opposite of what dominant culture is about, which is about more and about disconnection.
Mine versus yours, your plate versus mine versus this is like a partage sharing style of like what's mine is yours.
Yeah. Although there are some foods that I'm not so good with the partage, like halloumi. If you know halloumi, like one of my favorite desserts, I will tell you all, it blew my mind. I had it just a handful of years ago. So you know what halloumi is, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so your
guests
guests might not, of course. Exactly. So if your listeners don't know, this is very important, but I don't want you to go and buy it, because then I won't be able to buy any. So it's a cheese.
It's gross. It's so gross. Cheese. It's the most delicious thing ever.
Heinous, yeah. Right. It's a cheese that gets grilled. And then when you grill the cheese, it's salty goodness. And then one of the recipes that I've explored with this, that I had tried once, was with honey on the halloumi, dates and walnuts.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
As a dessert.
Yeah.
It is incredible.
That reminds me of of a dessert that we have in Jordan, atayef, which we have during Ramadan. And it's not halloumi, but it's kind of a cheese that's we call it halloumi. It's not halloumi, but it's it's what's it called? It's still a salty cheese that has the same stretchiness.
The texture. Yeah.
It's so funny that we're here to talk about money, but really, like, what?
Well, we're here to talk about all the things of abundance, and
right? But like how to us, what I'm trying to say is that we have the money hat on because we knew coming into this conversation. But
Mhm.
intuitively, the answer about life and what turns us on is not money. It's the simpler things. It's the sharing of meals, it's the sharing of moments, it's the connection that really turns us on in life, even if we think, oh, we're business owners and we need to, succeed and success means money and blah blah blah. But actually, even if that's what you people think, that's not the bottom line here. And let's not forget, the
Mm.
bottom line is that we want money to connect. We want money to
Yeah.
elevate. We want money to build communities that are purpose fueled. We want money to be able to sit down and be 100% present with our spouse, our best friends, our dog, our cat, when we are in the moment with them, instead of just worrying and fretting and fretting. That is why we want money. It's that presence, it's that peace of mind, it's that connection with ourselves, with nature, with others as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I love what you're speaking to because it's really about
Mhm.
embodiment, right? Like
Haha.
there's this
Haha.
abstract
Yep.
concept, right? There's this abstract concept of money of like, okay, so there's zeros and ones in your account, and there's these digits that you're in your account, and most people don't even carry cash anymore,
Mhm.
right? So money has become more and more abstract
Removed.
and removed, exactly. And as it becomes more abstract and disconnected from embodiment, it causes more and more
Mhm.
suffering. And so I love that what you're naming, which is this idea of like, how do we actually talk about what we want money
Mhm.
for and actually start enjoying
Mhm.
that rather than the compulsive pursuit of more. And let's be really honest, like groceries cost
More
money,
money
right?
these days too. Yeah.
Right, a hell of a lot more. Yeah, just went grocery shopping this morning. I was like, "Oh, wow, we're doing this. Okay, like that
Yup.
wasn't what I was expecting." Right?
Mhm.
Let me take a breath and notice. And but I feel it's very important because as we move to this world that is flat,
Mhm.
right, that is losing texture, that when we talk about money, we're talking about what people really want is an experience of embodied
Yes.
abundance, which is the time that you were talking about to be present with our loved ones, which is to have the sensory
Yes.
experiences of foods that are nourishing for us that come from the land, and not the amount of ones and zeros we have in our
Mhm.
accounts,
Mhm.
which doesn't necessarily correlate with
Mhm,
well-being.
and to create rather than just consume, right? As well, on top of that. So, just for context, because people really have jumped into mid conversation for that started like 3 days ago. Felina and I met inside of a community that we both belong to. It's the Trauma of Money. Well, the program's the Trauma of Money method, which I highly recommend. But yeah, it's the Trauma of Money community that is led by Chantel Chapman. It's a really beautiful, nourishing community, and we talk real talk there. Like it's the real stuff. And one of the things that Chantel was talking about the other day was how being trauma informed with money, when in the context of money, right? There's a trauma informed manifestation or trauma informed, blah, blah, blah. It's not just about nervous system regulation. She mentioned other aspects of trauma that we need as practitioners need to be aware of or sensitive to or even informed by to be truly trauma informed. So the context that we're coming into this conversation is money, but also how trauma informed entrepreneurship, really, because we both do somatic work and all that, how that is actually, I don't know, like the building block of the future. The hope that we all have is that we're no longer, because everything you mentioned, the word that came to me was like unfulfilled. If we start focusing, or if we start using trauma informed practices to help create fulfillment, there will be less consumption and less pain. And I know I just like I went straight in, but you can pick it up, pick it up. I just went.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love what you're speaking about. So So let's roll it
Mhm.
back for a moment here
Reel
so
me
folks
in.
know like how we got yeah, no, I love it. I love you going rogue. I love that. That's so rich. Because that's so, you know, we came into this conversation exactly at you that as you said about how do we create a world that is more trauma informed and serve our people, and look at the big picture. So for context, so I when people ask me what I do for a living, I say I help people in mission driven organizations master resilience to stress, anxiety, and trauma in order to have a more meaningful impact in the world. That can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes I do one on one coaching with folks, sometimes I do organizational work, sometimes I lead classes. So it takes a lot of different forms. I don't love the word coach, but you know, for many, many reasons, right? I don't love it, but I've received, professional training and anyway. So, but the reason we wanted this kind of conversation, our energy kind of really jammed together was because of this awareness that in the online space, very often there is some awareness of using the language of being trauma informed. And it might talk about the nervous system, but it doesn't talk about systemic trauma. So just to give some context, I started my career in international diplomacy. So I was a diplomat. I worked for the World Bank. I was doing development work around the world. And my degree was in international economics. So I come to this work of of doing work with anxiety and stress and trauma in individuals with kind of a background of what's happening in the bigger systems globally. And so, and why that, and the reason why that's relevant for your listeners is because very oftentimes what we are taught in dominant culture is push, 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 push. And what I mean by that is individualism, right? So we might have an awareness of like, oh, I might have some awareness of not getting my attachment needs met as a child, but I might not recognize how my identity as a cis white woman from an immigrant lineage is going to impact how I actually can make a living. So for some people listening to this is quite obvious, right? So I tend to see that there are people tend to be around this topic in one of two places. Can I go there?
Of course, yeah, please.
So for a lot of coaches and therapists and healers, we have been very much indoctrinated in the individualistic healing model, right? And so
Mhm.
we work one on one with clients, we get paid one on one from people, we're not a part of a big system, and we can work with the individual issues people might have experienced. On the other hand, though, there might be people listening who come from communities that perhaps have been the recipients of more systemic oppression, right? Communities of color, people who are in the LGBTQ community, people who have had their rights systematically taken. And
Mhm.
so it's really important when we're looking about I think about our money issues and our quote unquote success in business and how to unfuck our money, to look at our place within all of those contexts, not just one or
Yeah.
the other. A lot of coaches and healers will talk about on what's happening on an individual level, but if we're not also
Mhm.
taking into account systemic trauma, we can really cause a lot of harm to ourselves and to the people that we're serving.
Yep. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, my personal I think I was sharing that with you yesterday. My personal money and trauma came from my individual, so that's
Mhm.
where I actually went straight into is first for me and then I saw how this can help others. So I definitely am one of the people that focus on individual healing, but I am also always educating and informing myself on the bigger picture. But honestly, I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been in America or like I don't know why. Like if I were still in the Middle East, that wouldn't have been something that I thought of or considered, right? So there are things that I started paying attention to now because I live here, but because I'm not always so scared of my internal world after doing all the healing. I'm no longer in survival, right? So now I can help people that are not just me, the
Right.
outside of
Yeah.
me.
And
Yeah.
you know what I love about that is is in trauma healing, oftentimes what ends up happening is that we do work more towards getting out of like sometimes many of us were victims, right? When we've experienced
Hmm.
trauma, we
Hmm.
were victims and
Definitely.
we move from that into what in some modalities we call healthy aggression. So I'm a somatic
Hmm.
experiencing practitioner and assisting teaching faculty. And so I help train new therapists in somatic experiencing. And one of the things that we talk about in that modality, which is a very rigorous 3-year intensive program that
Yep.
I'm
I'm
so
in it.
excited you're in.
I'm
I'm
in
so
it.
excited you're in. Is when our nervous system can move from the freeze response, when we come out of a freeze
Yeah.
response, which many of us are, and we can start having more mobile responses, which is we can go towards the things that we want, right? We can flight or we can fight. We're actually moving towards being more externally oriented, and
Yep. Yep.
developmentally that's really important. And one of the things that we're also looking for as we're healing our own individual trauma is healthy aggression. And when we use the word healthy aggression,
Hmm.
a lot of my clients don't like it. I can think of like 5 people who are like, I don't like that word, I don't want to be aggressive. And I'm like, think of a
Yeah.
mama bear, think of a bear, right? If you go into a bear's
Uh-huh.
territory, they're going to make sure that you don't mess with their cubs, right? They're going to show you some
Hmm.
healthy
Hmm.
aggression, right? They're not going to
Hmm.
blow you out of the water with an AK-47, right? They're going to show
Like,
appropriate, right? They're going to show some appropriate
defensive.
defensive orienting responses. And so when we are thinking about our relationship with money, it's really helpful to think about, okay, how can I use what I'm experiencing, not just for my own well being, but to create systems that are better for all of us, right? So many practitioners, I know so many people in the helping profession, so many therapists, so many coaches, so many healers who want nothing more than to be of service to their communities and can't feed themselves, right?
Yep.
Because the needs are so large for being of service in the
Hmm.
world, and resources don't seem to come, don't seem to value those things. Like look at how much money school
Yeah.
teachers make, right? Versus hedge fund holders, right?
Nurses.
Nurses.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
required for us to move out of the kind of scarcity mindset is to organize and to see how we can, by being together, we can recognize that
Hmm.
the systems that we're struggling against individually, they're functioning that way intentionally, right? They were meant
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they were meant to be that way. They were meant to serve a particular population. And if you're not that particular population, you're probably going to be suffering for a really, really long time. So that was a lot of words, but that was the gist of what I was thinking about.
Oh, I mean, I knew this conversation was gonna be so good. I'm learning so much, and I'm so happy that this is recorded. I keep checking. I was like, "Is it really recording? Because this is so cool." I love everything that you're saying. I want to be like you when I grow up.
Do the SE training. Do the SE training.
All I am in it. We have the same
We have
mentor,
this
which
one of
is
the same, which is
really like against all
incredible.
odds.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
so beautiful. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
what's been really helpful to me is to make sure that I'm also being mentored by people who are culturally responsive as well and who
Hmm.
really understand.
Yes.
We have different lived identities, right? You have a background from the
Yep.
Middle East. I have a background from the Mediterranean. People who have, come from Asia are going to have a going to have a
Perspective
different
and
cultural expectations
everything.
about money. And
Hmm.
rather than not talking about that because it's so complicated and unpleasant, let's jump into that,
Hmm.
right? Because it explains a lot. It
Yeah.
explains a lot of challenges that folks have when we look at
Hmm.
our culture. And so that's the piece I love to bring in.
Yeah. So that, I have like a bit of an outline of what we said we were going to talk about yesterday. And one of the things that feels really fun is like, what does it mean to be a bicultural coach or being multicultural as a coach, how do you see that being different? Because I am too. Like I've got Middle Eastern behind me. I lived in Australia for many,
Yeah.
many years. I lived in France, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And America. And New Orleans. That's a
That's a
different
totally
culture.
different
New Orleans is a
culture.
different culture. I lived there. That's a completely different
It's
story.
really important
Yeah.
for us to think about depending on the populations that we serve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think about it like when our money relationship at home is like looking at, are you from one culture living in another culture, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
automatically going to have an impact on your relationship with money, right? Because think
Mm-hmm.
about, if you look at if you've looked at the lens of the chakras, for example, that are where we're closest to the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our needs for safety, stability, security, those are all related to the land.
Mm-hmm.
So what will very often happen is, say you are from one culture and you're living in another culture, that's going to impact just by the nature of that your body was transported
Mm-hmm.
from where it naturally was,
Mm-hmm.
willingly or not, right?
Yeah,
There's a
of
lot of
course.
folks whose bodies were not transported willingly, and they have experienced the legacy of that. And
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the very big reasons why some of those communities don't have proximity to resources.
Yeah.
And so when we can look at our culture, how it's impacting us, maybe you're in a partnership, maybe you have a business partnership with a business partner who comes from another culture, who
Mm-hmm.
sees things a little bit differently, or maybe
Yep.
your spouse is from a different culture. And so when it comes to money issues, you're like, hey, like I'm happy to invest all this money in this big training program, but
Mm-hmm.
your partner might come from a different culture
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
and say, oh, wait a minute, we can't do that. Like we need to, get, a new water heater. Like we can, right? There might be
Yeah.
very, very,
That's me
and
and my
so,
husband, actually.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get, yes. And so it can be very helpful when and I've been doing this work for 30 years. Like I don't expect somebody who's a new practitioner to be able to have this skill.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about it though, because it's something I always have in the back of my mind when anybody comes to me as a client to work together, and they're like, oh, I'm a lot of stress. I've heard embodiment is helpful. What can we do? I have this vision of being a photographer, but I'm stuck and I can't do anything about it. Okay. I start asking the questions, or I start feeling out, okay, what culture is this person from? What culture is their family from? What
Mm-hmm.
culture are their neighbors from and their community from? Because that's going to impact massively what our relationship is to money. Does that
Okay.
make
Yeah.
sense?
Of course. Of course, it makes sense. It's very, very obvious, right? When you put
Yeah.
it that way. I
Yeah.
mean, having come from very different cultures myself and having implanted myself voluntarily from one to
Hmm.
another, from like Jordan to Australia to France, New Orleans, Melbourne, like I do these things so quickly. I immerse myself in cultures and then I'm out so quickly that
Yeah.
that has, yes. So I know what you mean. Yes,
and that
thank
has
you.
an and that has an impact on us. And so that's and
Mhm.
so that's a piece that that's really, can I riff for a second here? Is that
Right?
okay?
Oh my goodness, sing it. Yep.
So many, because the cost of housing in the United States has
Mm.
exploded, right?
Oh yeah.
So many healers and coaches and teachers are becoming digital nomads, right? Which
Mhm.
for some people at some stages in life can be like a really, really great fit. I'm not saying that
Yeah,
I won't
I'm
do it someday, right?
yeah. No,
And
not me.
right, not you, right. And I've lived in enough countries, I've traveled enough, and what I know is that if we are to create wealth for ourselves, long-term sustainable wealth,
Mhm.
sometimes that impulse to go away. We need to look at it a little bit, right? We need to see, like, oh, is this a flight response? Like I this is something that I work with all the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to do laundry. I want to go do the Camino in Spain. Like, let me just, leave my
Is that
life and,
yeah,
and
of
go do that,
course.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like of course. And I'll probably do it at some point. But when I think about the integration of, like, when we're talking about money
Mhm.
and what we need as bicultural people to gain access to that, it's knowing our cultures, it's knowing the messages we got from our cultures about money. It's and on top of that, the trauma, right? Because
Yeah,
culture
the
and
trauma.
trauma, right? Those are different things,
Yep.
right? They can look like the same thing, but they can be very, very different.
Yep.
And so when we have space holders who are helping us in our relationship with money or with embodiment, who have that background, it can just bring another layer to,
Mhm.
I'm not saying you shouldn't go follow your bliss, sweetheart, and go travel the world and being a digital nomad. God bless you if that's what you want to do. What
Mhm.
I'm
But
saying though, is this a flight response from
Mhm.
somebody from your lineage, right?
Yep.
Where maybe you were refugees, or maybe, yeah,
Oh my
I'll
God,
stop.
this was me. This was so good. No, please keep going. This was so me. Yes, yes, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, my people are Bedouins. Of course, I want to
Hmm.
go from left, right, and
Hmm.
center, right? Like
Yeah.
they keep
Yeah.
joking, "Oh, you're such a nomad." I'm like, "Duh, I'm from Jordan." Of course, I'm a
Yep.
nomad. I'm literally a nomad. But
Yep.
yes, for me, it was a flight response, to be
Yep.
honest. Yeah.
Yep. And we can look at it with compassion and care
Oh
and
yeah.
see, okay,
Of
what is the
course.
piece that's like my culture that's beautiful, that like I don't love getting on planes and
Mm-hmm.
producing tons of CO2 in the environment. I'm very concerned about what's
Yes,
happening
of
in the
course,
environment.
always. Mm-hmm.
And I know that spending time in Greece with my people and the land is meaningful and important to me.
Yeah.
Is that a flight response or is that medicine, right? And
Yeah.
so it requires some discernment. And when we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the lens of money, I feel like because we're living in such a disembodied culture with this abstract quality known as
Very,
money,
very
we
abstract.
need
Yeah.
people who are in the helping professions who can be grounded in kind of some of the
Yes.
bigger systems that we're in.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I say exactly the same thing in a very primitive language. Not as sophisticated as that. But yes, we're on the same page. Which makes, I wanted to circle back because the word wealth was a word that I felt so resistant towards. But then over the past few months, when I'm resistant to something, usually I lean in. I'm like, "Ooh, cute. Okay, there's a bit of like over there, right?" So I lean in. I'm like, "What's up?" So I started investigating that word wealth and what it actually means to me. Why did it feel like a dirty word to me until I started thinking of sustainable wealth. And let's go there.
Oh, all day, every day.
Let's
Let us
do it.
go there.
Yeah.
Let's go there all day, every day. I love that you're talking about that. So, way back in the day, before in my previous career, I also spent time working in the space of sustainability and corporate social responsibility. And one of the things that I did, this was more than 20 something years ago, was I helped co-write a book on socially responsible investing. And
Mhm.
what I remember at the time, and I, did a lot of research on that topic. What I remember at the time, and I haven't been in this field in quite some time, so like I'm not giving investment advice. Obviously, let me be very
Okay,
clear.
put a disclaimer in the
Put the
side of the
disclaimer on
show
it, very
notes.
very clear. But what we found when we were looking at socially responsible and ESG and sustainable investing was
Mhm.
that when we looked at medium term returns, they were very similar to the returns of non sustainable investments.
Mhm.
So, which is to say, in the short term, extraction is going to make more money, right? That is code. And in the short term, you can exploit
Mm.
yourself, you can exploit the
Mhm.
environment,
Mhm.
you can exploit labor, and your short term profits next quarter will increase.
Yeah.
Whereas in sustainable investment that looks at what used to be called the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profits,
Mhm.
in the short term, it might not have as high returns, but it will over the medium term. And I think that that's important for us to be talking about when for your listeners who are coaches and healers and therapists and people looking to heal their relationship with wealth
Yeah.
and money, right? It is what are the elements of well-being and wealth for me? Like, it's a
Mhm.
really good exercise. One of the exercises that I have my clients do when we talk about issues around wealth is actually write down, like, okay, what does wealth mean to you?
Mhm.
Right? Because wealth to you might mean something very different to me than it does to me, right?
Yeah.
So very often, and we get really clear on what those elements of abundance and wealth might be.
Yeah.
For some people, wealth might be like having a sustainable revenue stream over time.
Mhm. Mhm.
It might be a trickle, but it's a sustainable revenue stream, right? Like for
Mhm.
some people,
Mhm.
that's how they think of wealth and abundance. For some people, it's like no, it needs to be, I'm happy with feast and famine, right? I'm happy with
Hmm.
getting big contracts and then not having anything for months and working on a
Yeah.
project basis like that. And
Hmm.
so when I think of wealth, which is moving beyond just income generating activities, which is what our people do, it's starting to think strategically. And what I have found
Hmm.
as somebody who's also been, the word wealth was never something that I was interested in as well. That
Hmm.
was not something that, like, I was just like, what are you talking about? That's not for me. Like, what, like, I
Yeah.
don't get that.
Hmm.
What I've noticed and experienced is this, it really is a big shift in terms of thinking of opportunities and possibilities in quite different ways.
Okay.
So for example, I'm in conversations with some people right now who we're looking to partner and perhaps do some work together. And I'm interested in things that are very different than what I was interested in when I was, 20 years ago. For
Yeah.
example, so now I am interested in shareholding and in
Hmm.
ownership, right? In
Wow.
creating
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
assets.
Hmm.
Whereas 20, 30 years ago, I was like, I don't care. I get a paycheck. I get to do cool work. I get to travel around the world. Like, what do I care about wealth building? It wasn't
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
love, so I think that, and so getting clear on what your elements of wealth are and what our individual
Mhm.
elements of wealth might be, which is just in my nervous system, it's very much um, it's an experience of well-being, right? You can think
Yeah.
of wealth and spell it
It's the
W-E.
mezze.
It's the meze, right? But think about, like, one of the ways you can spell wealth is
Mhm.
Wellth, like wealth, right?
Oh,
Right? Like,
yeah.
that's the kind
Yeah.
of wealth that I want to think about, is like, how can I be
Ah.
well in this exploration of wealth?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Do I know that we talked about this briefly, and I don't really want to go there, but kind of put things into context. I'm preparing what I'm calling my anti-manifestation campaign. So one of the things that the coaching world, the mainstream coaching world now, I don't know, it's funny that we have a mainstream coaching world now, and the manifestation culture and all that is the focusing on the riches of, like, they don't think about building long-term wealth. It's about now, now, now. Oh, worthy, blah, blah, blah. You're not worthy enough. You didn't believe enough. So buy this program. It's like the riches kind of thing. And what is happening for my people, my audience, my community, is that that kind of stuff is making them feel like they're not enough, right? But not just that. There's a big amount of money being spent, which leaves people in what we called yesterday debt and destruction, a destruction of their, sense of self-worth, their self-doubt and all that stuff, but also the overdoing. And that's where I want to go with this. This is like a little, like a dog-leg segue into, this is where I want to go. It's the overdoing. It's, you mentioned exploitation of self for profit. So it's that exploitation of self. It's that, you called it the inner colonizer when we chatted yesterday, like that give, do, and no boundaries. And that is such a big wealth blocker, to be honest. Like, that's what I see for myself, for my people. Let's go there. Let's talk about that inner colonizer.
Yeah, let's do it. I love that you're bringing this up. So the way I think about it, and I want to give a lot of gratitude to the people who have educated me. I have
Hmm.
taken a lot of time to be educated from people who are on the front lines as social justice activists and from
Hmm.
communities directly. And so I've spent many years listening to folks and educating myself, taking classes from many, many teachers. And so one of the ideas that you're kind of speaking to, and the way this came up, is this idea that this country was founded on extraction and exploitation, right? It
Hmm.
was,
Hmm.
I think most people can appreciate in that in certain, if they're willing to be honest with themselves. I think most people can understand that.
Hmm.
And so what happens is, so a colonizer does what? They go to another place,
Yeah.
or they go where something is valuable and they take, right? Without reciprocity, without giving.
Yeah.
And so, and this entire planet pretty much has been colonized, right? By
Yeah.
the powers that be. And so what happens though, colonizing is not just a function of politics and geography. It's also a function of let's take a deep breath, listeners. Let's take a deep breath and wiggle your toes if this is getting you activated. Yeah,
It's getting me
exactly. Yeah.
activated.
Yeah, let's just take a deep breath and maybe, yeah, just wiggle your toes. Nothing bad is happening in this.
We're
Yeah.
here, orient around you.
Yeah,
You're here, you're now.
that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So what happens is that paradigm of exploitation becomes internalized because that's the only way that we can succeed, we tell
Yeah.
ourselves in the system. And so what we see are those who have greater proximity to wealth and resources, are the ones who made the rules, right? That this
Mm-hmm.
is how colonizing works. And so this is these kinds of people, these kinds of bodies are the ones who are valued, and these other ones aren't. And
Mm.
so, what then we do is we internalize this colonizer and we have this view of ourselves. Oh, if I am not extracting the maximum labor from myself on a daily basis, something bad is going to happen. I'm going to be left behind. And I want to be very transparent about this. The reality is, in the United States, where many of your listeners, I suspect, will be living, we don't have a safety net. And the reality is, for many people, if they don't hustle, they will be out on the streets.
Yeah.
That those are facts.
These
Like,
are
I want to
facts.
be
It's not a
really.
mindset. It's
It
not a
is not a
belief.
mindset. It is not a mindset, right?
Yeah.
For many, 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 many folks,
Mm-hmm.
that is a reality. And what I would say to those folks is, there's nothing wrong with having a job. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with getting a job and having a job. There's nothing wrong with recognizing that, wow, if I am pushing so hard to be an entrepreneur and I'm exploiting my labor at this age now,
Yeah.
the cost in my health and in my long-term well-being may not make this a wise investment. And the reason I can say this is because I was one of those people, right? When I was in
Mm-hmm.
my parents were immigrants to this country, and I got to some very expensive universities
Mm-hmm.
and graduate schools. And when I started, I started working for the World Bank, and then I became a diplomat, and I was working in the Balkans. And everything looked great on paper. It looked wonderful on paper.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I was getting on planes at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was traveling around the world where other people were doing, normal life things. I
Yeah.
was exploiting myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that that's what I was doing. And the cost that happened when I had to transition out of that was massive in terms of my health, the income on the impact on my health and my overall well-being and my earning capacity. Right. And so I want to be very transparent with folks, particularly, but I mean, I work with folks from all age ranges, and I really love that about my practice. But when you're younger and you think you can exploit yourself for a while, just a little while longer,
Mm-hmm.
what you don't realize is that very often that is layered with not only identifying with the inner colonizer, but also with a nervous system that is deeply dysregulated.
Yeah.
And you can perpetuate that for decades until the body starts breaking
Decades.
down.
Yep. Ooh. Okay, I need a moment. That hit home. It's so good. It's so accurate. It hit home. And truth hurts sometimes, huh? And I'm not saying you said it in any hurtful way, but it's just that have been so fed such bullshit that sometimes when we finally hear the truth, I don't know if it's what you feel is hurt or resonance. It just has this feeling in your body of like this ripple effect. I don't know if it's good to hear the truth. It's a breath of fresh air to hear the truth from people. So I want to thank you for saying that, naming
And
that.
Nadine, something that I will offer is that, like, we only hear what we're ready to hear.
Of course, right?
Right. Otherwise, it's right. We can't metabolize all of the change
Of
that's
course.
happening.
Yeah.
It's too much. Right.
Yeah.
And so what's really exciting is like, oh, wow, I'm in a place where I can take in more information. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a place
Mm-hmm.
where I have enough safety and enough stability and enough capacity in my nervous system.
Yeah.
and enough support and enough resource that I can actually metabolize some more information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be really healing and transformative.
That's why when someone tells you come and you'll heal all your wounds in a 3-month program, lol. That's not a good idea. That's not gonna happen.
And that really speaks to how when we're creating programs and when we're
Mhm.
creating content, when our nervous system is in a when our nervous system is dysregulated, the energy that we are creating that program from is going to be dysregulating.
Of course,
Right? And so
yeah.
it's because everything carries the energy that we put into it. And so I think about it of
Absolutely.
like, if I want to create an experience of abundance for others,
Uh-huh.
my nervous system needs to be in an experience of abundance, right? Like
Yes, exactly.
how do I have that? And if it's not possible, I can also acknowledge that maybe not now, right? Maybe this isn't meant to happen right now. Like maybe I want so, I have I like social media is not a thing for me, right? It's
Mhm.
like, oh, it's like every once in a while, sometimes I'll post something, some
You
random
followed
thing.
me, so that's a compliment.
That was well, that's a very important thing. Yes,
Ooh.
it was very good to follow you. And because I recognize in terms of I want to be close to folks. I want to be proximate. I want to be available. I want people to know that I can be of
Yeah,
service to them. But I also know that what that does to my nervous system isn't the best thing. And I'm very protective of my nervous system right now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it
It's
doesn't mean I don't look at the news, right? It doesn't
yeah.
mean I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
care
of
about what's happening
course.
in society. It doesn't mean I protect myself because I'm we're sturdy and fragile beings, right? But
Yeah.
there are certain kinds of toxic harm that I don't need to take on to exploit other people's other people's nervous systems. And I'm not saying social media is good or bad. I am
Mhm.
saying that wherever we're creating from is going to have an
Yes.
impact.
I know, right? Like I'm a very scientific person. My undergrad, my postgrad, they're all in science, blah blah blah. And to know something versus to know something are two different things where my physical body knows the resonance of the energy and the intention, whereas my brain is like, but how? But how? And I'm like, every time I question how, I get the like an example that is so real of like your energy. Your energy is not like, "Oh my god, high vibes, babe." No.
Oh God. Yeah, and anybody who's and anybody who's like only, good vibes only, babe, like they don't need to be in my space. Like they can just leave. Like
I'm all about honesty,
I'm
even if
done.
I mean, you heard me the other day, I'm just about honesty. I have no time to beat around the bush or life's too short for that.
You know what? I will tell you something is that one of the joys of going through the menopausal transition
Uh-huh.
is as one of my teachers is a woman named Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. She is incredible. Look her up, follow her.
Okay.
She's an incredible Zen priest. Um, and she talks about not giving fucks anymore, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm out of the fuck giving business, right? If
Mhm,
like
mhm.
this doesn't land, then my medicine isn't right for you. And
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
And there are other people whose medicine is, which is amazing.
Before understanding the effects of hormones and menopause and perimenopause and all that, people I have like friends who are younger than me ask like, what does it feel like to be like, oh, 35? Oh, I'm not 35, I'm 43. Like, oh, and then 40. Oh, and then now we are in their mid 40s. Like, what does it feel like? And I'm like, you know what it feels like? It feels liberating because you just naturally give less fucks. I don't care if people laugh at me in the street because my favorite song came onto my phone and I want to dance. Like that's my thing. I want to do that. Right? Like I don't care if what I'm saying may be a little bit too polarizing, but it's the truth. Because I,
Yeah.
I just don't have time for this. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um
And it's about
mm,
becoming your authentic self, right? And it's about, so much of healing in dominant culture is about fixing ourselves,
oh
right?
my
Like
gosh, yeah.
right?
It's more about
Fixing our
becoming, more like
right.
shedding, being more and more you. Yes. Yes, that.
And that's a really attractive quality. And that's a really
Mhm.
attractive quality, and resources tend to go to those places because there's wisdom
Exactly.
there,
There
right?
is
Like there's
wisdom there,
wisdom there.
yeah. So you told me before we hit record to mention your headphones.
Oh my God. So I have a rant. So this is funny. So I'm not going to talk about the company that made these headphones, these little ones that are that go in my ear. But what I can tell you is, so one of the things that I have learned over the years is, like, you buy tech and you spend a lot of money on tech, and I know for a fact that the cost of the tech is not in the labor who produced it, right? Pretty much we know that people who are manufacturing most of the equipment in our homes in China are paid nominal, barely survival wages, right? So I just want to name that.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Those are human beings on the other side of the planet right now whose labor I am benefiting from as I'm sitting here on my, $2,000+ computer and with my AirPods. So you might have noticed over the past few years that you have a phone or a computer or headset, and after 2, 3, 4 years, you need a new one.
Yep.
Now, the reason for that, and so the reason for that is not because companies don't know how to make longer lasting materials. The reason for that is this concept called planned obsolescence, in which tech companies are actually intentionally making it possible that you have to buy another computer in another 4 or 5 years. So when I was a child, way back when the earth was cooler, you would buy something manufactured and it would last
Built to last.
it was built to last, right? It would last 10, 20, 30 years. You would have it. I remember, we had one of our first televisions for like 12 years or, a long, you had things for a really, really long time.
Fisher
And
Price
now,
was thicker back then.
That's right. Yeah,
right?
well,
Yeah.
100%. And so, but that's really important. And this connects with the climate crisis.
Yes.
Because all of these materials are all of the metals and the minerals that are being extracted in Africa and in other parts of the world are going to make, my telephone and my computer and my AirPods. And so there's extraction and exploitation happening there. And then when those phones end up in or AirPods or what have you end up going into the trash or recycling, then they become scrap metal.
Yep.
But and so there are places in the world that are filled with mountains and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of electronic waste that are creating so much toxicity that people can't breathe next to them. And so I mentioned that for a couple of reasons. I wanted to say this to your listeners today, because we have to have a sense of proportion about what abundance actually means.
Yes. Enoughness. Yes.
Right.
Just because there's unlimited whatever out there, whatever we're taught about abundance and manifestation, there's unlimited amount of whatever it is that you want out there for you. Just because there's unlimited amounts doesn't mean that you cannot determine what's enough for you.
Because the earth isn't unlimited and the earth's resources aren't unlimited. And so we have to be, there's a wonderful book that when I first read it over a decade ago, I was like totally turned off by it. I was totally turned off. I was like, this is for people who, like, I don't know, like I read it. I was like, yeah, that's nice, but this is not for me. This is for other people. And I reread it again recently, and I'm really actually studying it right now. It's The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist.
Which you're studying it with the Sounds True? Is that
no. I'm studying it myself.
Self-study. Okay.
Yeah. And she talks a lot about this concept of sufficiency, which isn't a new concept. Old indigenous cultures have this idea of sufficiency. And so that's important. So when we went to kind of come back to our piece about unfucking our relationship with money, when we think about that, it's like, what is sufficiency?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because everybody thinks that sufficiency is just a little bit more.
Hang on,
right?
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, just in case I talked over you when you mentioned the name of the book. It's The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. Sorry.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pause, play, you go. Yeah.
So, I can't do that though, because sufficiency. Thank you. Good tracking. Yeah. Thank you. So this idea of sufficiency is a really important one when we're looking at our relationship to money, because it speaks to not only our personal sense of safety and security of like, oh yeah, do I have enough today? Do I
Yeah.
have enough right now for my basic needs? That puts our nervous system into a different state, right? We get out of fight or flight, we come into parasympathetic, we have rest and digest, we can be more pro-social. We can collaborate with people when we're pro-social. We can say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you. When
Yeah.
right when we're in fight or flight and we're like freaking out, we can't do that.
And
We can't
that's
socially
when we're
engage.
genuinely caring about
Correct.
people, not caring about people with like, not saying we're bad if we have survival ulterior motives,
Yeah.
but it won't be as genuine. So
That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so and on the other hand, so it's about this concept of sufficiency that comes in all indigenous cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of, so with our money and our like money and embodiment have to go hand in hand
Yeah.
from my perspective, for them to go,
Absolutely. Yeah.
for them to be healthy and to bring well-being, they have to be aligned and in relationship. And when we, and that means also looking at how we are treating the material objects in our reality
Yeah.
and the implication of those material objects on the global system, right? I
Yeah.
can, I can right now, click off the Zoom and I can go and order the thing, and the thing shows up, at my doorstep, and 6 hours later, from this huge complex of this wonderful infrastructure, right? This, it's
It's
wonderful that we
wonderful.
can.
It
It's
is.
wonderful in certain
Yeah.
ways, and it has a cost to the environment, and that cost to the environment has a cost to our own
Mm-hmm.
health and
Mm-hmm.
our psychological and spiritual well-being. And
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
the simple thing about having AirPods that are junk,
Uh-huh.
it can really be an opportunity for exploration, right?
Yeah.
We can really, rather than just like, oh shit, I'm just going to go online and buy another pair of, whatever, how much these cost,
Uh-huh.
right? Of like, wow, like, am I thinking about the impact of my actions on the collective?
Yeah.
Or am I continuing to just extract endlessly because dominant culture tells me that's okay?
Yeah. So I'm gonna bring up a personal story actually. So I'm, Jordanian, and I was born in Jordan in 1981, and during the 80s and the 90s there was all the, the war, the Gulf War, and all of that stuff. So Jordan is not an oil rich country. Jordan is a poor country. And then on top of that, we had the refugees from Palestine and then the refugees from the Gulf. And during the Gulf War, resources were so stretched, scarcity was everywhere with all the refugees, and also like a really strict hold on how much petrol we can use, that we there was a law for a couple of years that was happening where um even numbered license plate cars were allowed on the road, and the next day were only the odd numbered license plate. Like that's how strict things are. So now I live here in the US and I'm married to an American. And going back to what we talked about earlier in the interview of how people from different cultures have such a different experience and perspective on money, of how people are like, oh, scarcity mindset is just so limiting, blah, blah, blah. But I want to say that not really, because I came from scarcity. I came from that. But that made me so much more appreciative of the resources. So if my husband, bless him, he's really lovely and he's very careful and he loves the environment. But if he would to throw something out, I'd be like, whoa, whoa, hold up. It's precious. What can we do with it? Can we upcycle it? Can we use it again? Can we turn it into something else? And now it became a habit in our house of we don't throw things. We're not hoarders, but it's like we don't throw things because we want to cherish them. So that's when, having coming from that scarcity background lent that perspective of like,
Mhm.
we don't have to throw everything out. We need to fix things. And my karma is wonderful because my husband is a maintenance technician. So we don't throw things out, we fix them. So that's
I love
perfect
that.
for my scarcity. Right? I
I
love
love that.
that.
I love
Yeah.
that. And sometimes we have to like set boundaries with ourselves, right? Like
Yes. Oh,
that's,
that as
and
well.
so
Yeah.
when you live in a culture, when there is abundance, or
Abundance
when
of
you
everything.
live when there is abundance of everything, the practice for many people really has to become like setting boundaries for themselves
Yeah.
around what I will spend and what I won't spend, how
Mhm.
I will spend, what I will spend on, right? Setting boundaries, how much energy I'm going to invest in my, like, how much time I'm going to spend going from one store to another looking for a better deal, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
those are,
yeah, yeah.
and so, and it depends on where, what kind of formative experiences people have come
Definitely.
from
Mhm.
to look at that. So I have a course called The Refuge of Boundaries that we go
Mhm.
over this through a 7 week long
Boundaries.
period,
Mhm.
which is all about like looking at the different kinds of boundaries we have to have, because
Mhm.
the only way to create and maintain wealth is by having boundaries. The only way to value the
Yes.
environment and our own bodies is by having boundaries. And just like people talk about, having a meditation practice,
Yeah.
I believe strongly in having a boundary practice
Oh
and
gosh,
really checking
yes.
with those boundaries on
So
on
good.
a regular basis. So
Mhm.
I think I'm going to be opening the course again early in 2025, but people can go on the website,
I'm
it's
gonna
and
join
and sign up
that.
for the wait list. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's such a wonderful opportunity to look at these different areas that impact our relationship to money, right?
Yeah.
And boundaries are about, can I receive and can I hold?
Of course, boundaries is about can I receive and can I hold? Fuck yeah. That is absolutely gold. And the reason why when you said that I started like giggling to myself is because 3 days ago I wrote something in my notes app that says boundaries. Learn more and deepen into that practice because you care about it a lot. Something I'm telling myself I care about
Yeah,
it. And then now you tell me you've got a course on boundaries. Fuck
there you have it.
yes.
You just manifested it.
Fuck yeah.
You manifested
I
it.
pooped it out of the sky.
I love that. You manifested your course. Yeah.
I manifested you actually.
Yep,
Um
absolutely. Ditto.
you know what? I'm gonna say something that's so not eloquent, like it's gonna just come out like this. But I always wanted to say this out loud. We come from a generation that suffered from scarcity, but we are in a world that is suffering from too much abundance. Of course we're fucked financially, like in our brains. So not very eloquent, but you know what I mean, right?
And I love what you're saying. And
Mhm.
for some of us, we did experience scarcity. I mean, that's definitely a story in my
For
lineage, right? And
reals.
it's and
Yeah.
it's and it's not for everybody's, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm proximate to people who have had, you know, access to resources for generations and generations, financial
Mhm.
resource, for many generations. And yet there's still an experience of scarcity. I want to leave. I don't know how much time we have, but
We
can
have
I
time.
mention
It's
another
fine.
book? Can I
Mhm.
mention
Yeah, yeah,
another
yeah.
book?
Sure, sure.
So I feel it's so helpful for folks to have access to this book because I read this book many years ago. It was actually on Obama's reading list, and I
Mhm.
found it from that many years ago. It's called The Broken Ladder,
Mhm.
and it's
Okay.
by a psychologist named Keith Payne. And it's actually about the psychology of what happens with inequality. And so
Mhm.
people can understand that coming from poverty can create a scarcity mindset, right? Like
Yeah.
that makes sense to most people. Most people
Yeah.
won't have a judgment about that. But in this country, in the United States, and in the West, I will speak, more generally, but particularly in the United States, as we know, inequality has skyrocketed, right? It
Yes.
used to be the relationship between a CEO's salary and an employee salary, or, some ratio of like, 20 to 1. And,
Mhm.
now it's like 3,000 to 1, right? So,
Mhm.
so the inequality that we are experiencing has skyrocketed. This is important. And we can go back to our understanding of the human nervous system.
Mhm.
So what Keith Payne talks about in this book, that I highly, anybody who wants to have a better relationship with money, like
Mhm.
go get
Okay,
those
the
two
broken
books, like
ladder.
The Broken Ladder and Soul of Money.
Mhm.
And The Broken Ladder, though, talks just about what happens though when we are around inequality. So he gives an example of how just being around a lot of proximity to wealth can create anxiety for people, even if you have your basic needs met.
I was just
Even,
writing about that. That's crazy. Yes, yes, yes.
so, okay. So he shares this example, which I love. So, when you get on an airplane, sometimes so let me ask you this. Let me ask it this way.
Sure,
Sorry.
sure, sure.
What do you think is the biggest predictor of airplane violence?
Oh shit. Um,
And it's not related to alcohol. I'll just give you that hint. But what do you think?
Oppression, nervous system, like repressed anger and oppression.
So some people, when I ask them this question, they're like, oh, people who are drunk. So that I took that one off the table. So I don't give that option anymore. Some people are like, oh, somebody who's being loud, pushing your chair, right? Then you're going to
Mhm.
punch them. Or maybe there's kids who are being rowdy, right? No. The biggest predictor of airplane violence actually is where the doors are on the
Oh
plane.
shit. I went too deep. Okay. Wow. Okay. Seriously?
Here's what happens. If you get on a plane and you walk through first class on the way to economy, that in and of itself is a predictor, and it is a correlation with greater likelihood of violence on that airplane.
What the fuck?
Why? Because as mammals,
Uh-huh.
we are very, very sensitive to cues like that. So
Mhm.
imagine our mammalian nervous system, right? I'm an ape, you're an ape. Maybe you're 6 inches bigger than I am. So you're gonna get a little bit more food than I am, right? That's
Mhm.
normal, right? We're in the jungle. We're gonna take care of our pack, we're gonna survive together.
Yeah.
But if you're 6 inches bigger than me and you get 6,000% more than I get,
Yeah.
something in my nervous system isn't gonna feel right.
Yep.
So I name this for your listeners and for all of us to keep in mind that many of us have our basic needs met, right? Many of us have access to clean water. Many of us have access to shelter. We might be spending, 30% of our 40% of our income on shelter, but we have access to safe shelter,
Yeah.
right? So we have access to our but inequality in and of itself is going to have cause people to feel anxiety and not a great relationship with money. And this applies for the wealthy as well. I
Mhm.
used to work at the Golden Door, which is a spa in Southern California, and it's like 10 grand a week. And there are very, lots and lots of billionaires go there, and it's a lovely, beautiful place. And the people were lovely. And they had as much money, they had as much anxiety about money
Yeah.
as people that I'm proximate to who work for minimum wage,
Mhm.
because in and of itself, inequality is has a correlation with stress and anxiety. So I want people to know that when they're spending time on social media,
Yeah.
right, and they're looking
Yeah.
around at what this coach did or what this therapist is making or how big her practice is, or how big her online program, or how many followers she has. Looking at that inequality is producing more stress, and
Yeah.
the more stressed you are, the less pro-social behavior you can have. The less pro-social behavior you have, the less likely it is you're going to read cues of people with whom you can collaborate with and have really nurturing, generative, financially abundant
Mhm.
relationships.
Oh my God, this is the best conversation in the world. I think, we were thinking yesterday, what should we call our episode? And I think I nailed it. I hope you're okay with it. I'm going to call it the best money conversation in the world. Is that cool?
I'm down. I love it.
May we please have you back on the Unfuck Your Money show,
It
please.
would be my honor.
What an episode. What an episode. Holy shit. I know I never get my socks knocked off. Is that American? Knock your socks
It
off? Yeah.
is.
Yeah, there you go. I never, barely ever. This was seriously a life-changing conversation. I knew it from this morning. It's like tingles. I know this is going to change my life. In many ways that I have not yet digested or wrapped my head around, a lot has changed within me just because of this past hour. So thank you for just this. Thank you for you. Thank you for sharing so generously. And I am definitely going to put all your details in the show notes, because I know that everyone is going to want to connect with you, because you are a wealth of knowledge and beautiful personality, giving and kind-hearted and hilarious and, strong and a badass,
Right back at you. Right back at you,
Yeah.
Nadine.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Reach out to Felina. I'll drop her. She's not really on socials, but I'll put them there anyway. But maybe I'll see you all in the Boundaries program in January. I think I'm definitely going to be in there. So
Just thank you so, so much. It's been such a delight connecting with you. I knew it. I knew it the minute I saw you. The minute I heard you open your mouth the other day, I was like, oh yeah, she's going to be my people. So I'm delighted we got to do this today.
God.
I hope your listeners found some value in the conversation and feel a little bit more ease in their relationship with money.
Fuck yeah. All right, everyone. See you next time on the Unfuck Your Money show. Bye for now.